Perfect grades were my shield, and my 4.0 GPA was the armor I'd built around myself. That's who I was, Jessie Park, the kid who had it all figured out. Every morning, I'd walk through the halls of Kingston High with my future mapped out in permanent ink. Top universities, dream career, success. No detours, no distractions, and absolutely no room for chaos. But life has a funny way of throwing wrenches into even the most carefully laid plans. Enter Leo Navarro, living proof that life isn't fair. He stood 6'2" of pure golden boy charm, with that easy smile that made teachers forget about late assignments and students part like the Red Sea when he walked down the hallways. While I spent my weekends buried in textbooks, he'd stroll into Monday's class still wearing yesterday's victory on his Letterman jacket, homework untouched, but that insufferable grin perfectly in place. I still remember that Tuesday morning when everything changed. The fluorescent lights of Mr. Benson's classroom buzzed overhead as he dropped the bomb that would derail my perfect senior year. "Jessie, you'll be tutoring Leo." 4 words that felt like a death sentence. I shot up from my desk so fast my chair screeched against the linoleum. "No way," I protested, my voice echoing in the sudden silence. "That's not happening." Looking back, I should have noticed the gleam in Leo's eyes, the way he watched me from his throne at the back of the class, spinning that stupid pen between his fingers like he was conducting an orchestra only he could hear. But I was too busy watching my carefully structured world tilt on its axis. "It's not up for discussion, Mr. Park," Mr. Benson said, his voice carrying that teacher tone that meant the conversation was over. "Leo needs to maintain his GPA for athletics, and you're the best student we have." That's when Leo's voice cut through the tension, smooth as honey but twice as sticky. "Come on, Park. Think of it as your chance to finally get some social credit. Might even learn how to loosen up that tie a little." The class tittered, and I felt my face flame. The worst part wasn't the laughter. It was how Leo said it, like he was doing me a favor. What I didn't know then was that this was just the opening move in Leo's game. A game that would start with a simple bet, end in an empty classroom after hours, and change everything I thought I knew about myself, about him, and about what really matters in the grand scheme of things. The library clock ticked away like a countdown to disaster. I sat across from Leo Navarro, watching him slouch in his chair as Mr. Benson's words echoed in my head. "If your grades don't improve, you're off the team." Leo had just sighed and flashed that trademark grin. "Guess the genius will have to work his magic then." The way he looked at me made my stomach twist, like this was all just another game to him. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall library windows, casting long shadows across our table. I pushed a worksheet toward him, basic algebra problems that any freshman could handle. "Start with this." But Leo didn't even glance at it. Instead, he leaned back, chair creaking, and fixed those dark eyes on me. "You know, Park, I've been wondering something," he said, completely ignoring the worksheet. "You really can't stand me, can you?" His voice was casual, but there was an edge to it, like he was trying to dig under my skin. The question hit a nerve I didn't even know was exposed. Years of frustration bubbled up inside me. "You want to know why?" I snapped, my voice barely above a whisper. "Because guys like you coast through life without lifting a finger. No studying, no effort, just showing up with that stupid smile and expecting the world to bend backward for you. And the worst part? It does." Leo's expression shifted, just slightly. He tilted his head, studying me like I was some fascinating puzzle he'd just discovered. "So that's what this is about? You're mad because things come easy to me?" The amusement in his voice made my blood boil. The next few tutoring sessions were like trying to teach calculus to a brick wall, a very attractive, incredibly irritating brick wall that seemed more interested in getting under my skin than learning anything. Leo would spend most of our time doodling sports plays in his notebook or trying to start conversations about anything except math. The few times he actually picked up his pen to solve a problem, I could feel his eyes on me instead of the paper. One particularly frustrating afternoon, as sunlight painted the library tables golden, Leo decided to play psychologist. You ever think about loosening up, Park? All this stress can't be good for you. He was spinning his pen again, that nervous habit that somehow looked graceful when he did it. I kept my eyes on my planner, aggressively writing down next week's assignments. Ever think about taking anything seriously? Don't need to, he shrugged, that easy confidence radiating off him. Things just have a way of working out. Something in me snapped. I slammed my planner shut, the sound echoing through the quiet library. That's exactly the problem. You don't try, you don't care, you just expect everything to fall into your lap like some kind of cosmic gift. I leaned forward, lowering my voice to a harsh whisper. If you don't give a damn about any of this, why are you even here? For the first time since I'd known him, Leo's perfect mask slipped. Just for a moment, but I saw something flash across his face, something real, something vulnerable. It was gone so quick, I almost thought I'd imagined it. Hey everyone, hold on. Don't go anywhere just yet, because you won't believe what happens next between Jesse and Leo. Will Jesse finally admit his true feelings? Or will his pride get in the way of what could be the most important relationship of his life? The next part of this story will show you exactly why sometimes the person who drives you crazy might just be the one who changes your life forever. And trust me, that empty classroom scene you just saw? It's nothing compared to what goes down in the school gym later. If you're loving the tension between these two and want to see more stories about unexpected love, pride, and the courage it takes to be honest with yourself, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to our channel because we post new stories every week that will make you feel things you never expected. From enemies to lovers, from denial to acceptance, we've got it all. And this story of Jesse and Leo? It's just the beginning. Share this video with that one friend who keeps fighting their feelings. We all know someone like Jesse, right? Maybe they need to hear this story too. The next part will have you at the edge of your seat. Will Leo give up on Jesse? Or will Jesse finally stop running from what his heart wants? There's only one way to find out. Turn on those notifications, because you don't want to miss what happens next. Trust me, that gym scene coming up, it changes everything. Basketball is my ticket, Leo said, his usual playfulness gone, replaced by something raw and honest. And yeah, I need passing grades to keep playing. The simplicity of his answer hit me harder than any of his jokes ever had. Something shifted in my chest, maybe understanding, maybe something else, but I pushed it away, sliding another worksheet across the table like a shield between us. For the next week, I threw myself into making sure Leo was ready for his algebra test. I created color-coded study guides, broke down complex problems into simple steps, and even stayed late explaining concepts until the librarian gave us pointed looks. I told myself it was just professional pride. I couldn't let anyone fail under my tutelage. But deep down, something else nagged at me. When Leo walked into our next session, I braced myself for bad news. So, I asked, trying to sound detached, how badly did you bomb it? The grin that spread across his face should have warned me. He pulled out his test and slid it across the table with the casual confidence of someone who knew they were about to turn someone's world upside down. 89%. The numbers stared back at me like a personal insult. I checked the name 3 times, looking for evidence of forgery or mistake. This is impossible, I muttered, my voice barely above a whisper. You barely paid attention half the time. Maybe I just needed the right motivation, Leo said, watching me with those dark eyes that seemed to see too much. The way he said it made my skin prickle with unease. Weeks of tutoring, and now suddenly you're a math genius? I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. What changed? Leo's smile turned predatory. Actually, this seems like the perfect time to collect on our little bet. You remember, right? The one where if I scored higher than you, you'd do whatever I wanted for a day? Ice flooded my veins. That wasn't serious, I protested weakly. But Leo was already leaning closer, his presence suddenly filling all the space between us. I was dead serious, he murmured, his voice dropping to a tone that made my heart stutter. Meet me after school. Don't be late. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I couldn't focus in any of my classes, Leo's words echoing in my head like a song stuck on repeat. Meet me after school. Don't be late. The way he'd said it, quiet, intense, almost intimate, kept replaying in my mind. I told myself to ignore it, to pretend the bet never happened. But something in Leo's expression told me he wouldn't let this go. So there I was after final bell, standing outside the gym like an idiot, arms crossed to hide my nervous fidgeting. When Leo emerged from practice, still in his basketball jersey with his dark hair damp and tousled, I realized I might have made a terrible mistake. The late afternoon sun painted long shadows across the parking lot as Leo emerged, his grin widening when he spotted me. Look who actually showed up. Thought you might chicken out. His hair was still damp from practice, curling slightly at the edges. Let's just get this over with, I muttered, trying to sound bored instead of nervous. Leo made a show of considering his options, tapping his chin thoughtfully. I could make you do something embarrassing. Maybe carry my books around like a personal assistant. Make you buy my lunch for a week. Then he stepped closer, his voice dropping lower. But I've got something more interesting in mind. Before I could process what was happening, his hand was around my wrist, warm and firm. I jerked back instinctively, but he just rolled his eyes. Relax, Park. I'm not dragging you off to your doom. Just follow me. Against every logical voice screaming in my head, I did. He led me behind the gym to a secluded corner I'd walked past 100 times but never really noticed. The setting sun bathed everything in honey gold light, making even the old brick walls look somehow softer. Leo leaned against the wall, casual as ever, but something about his posture seemed different, less performative. All right, he said quietly. Let's talk. Talk? I echoed stupidly. A familiar smirk played at his lips. What were you expecting? Something scandalous? His eyes glinted. Don't tell me you're disappointed. Heat rushed to my face. You're such an idiot, I managed, but the words came out weaker than I intended. Leo's laugh was soft, but then his expression shifted into something more serious. You really can't stand me, can you? It wasn't exactly a question. Why do you even care? Because, he said, shrugging one shoulder, you're different. The words hung in the air between us. What's that supposed to mean? Leo was quiet for a moment, like he was choosing his words carefully, something I'd never seen him do before. Everyone else, they like me because I'm the basketball guy, the popular kid. But you? He let out a small, almost self-deprecating laugh. You've never been afraid to tell me exactly what you think of me. Nobody else does that. I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it again. How could I explain that I'd spent more time thinking about Leo Navarro than I'd ever admit to anyone, including myself? That maybe all that frustration had been masking something else entirely? Suddenly, Leo moved closer, not touching me, but close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating off him, smell the faint scent of his soap. You're interesting, Park, he murmured, his voice low and intimate in a way that made my heart stutter. And I think I like that. I forgot how to breathe. Then, just as quickly as he'd moved in, Leo pulled back. He clapped a hand on my shoulder like we were just bros hanging out, but his touch lingered a second too long. See you at tutoring, he said casually, turning to walk away. I stood there for what felt like hours, my shoulder burning where he'd touched it, my mind replaying his words over and over. You're interesting, Park, and I think I like that. His words haunted me like a melody stuck on repeat. You're interesting, Park, and I think I like that. I spent the entire night analyzing every syllable, every subtle shift in his expression. Was this some elaborate joke? Another way for Leo Navarro to mess with my perfectly ordered life? It had to be. Guys like him didn't just— I buried that thought before it could fully form. The library felt different the next day. Even the familiar smell of old books and wood polish couldn't calm my nerves as I waited, unconsciously tapping my pen against the table in an unsteady rhythm. Nothing has changed, I told myself. He'll swagger in like always, wearing that infuriating smirk, and everything will go back to normal. Then Leo appeared and sat so close our elbows almost touched. The sudden proximity sent electricity through my veins. "What are you doing?" I managed to ask, proud that my voice stayed steady. He smiled, but it wasn't his usual cocky grin. "Maybe I'm becoming a better student." "Try again," I scoffed, flipping my text. Leo didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied me with that intense gaze that made me feel like I was being taken apart, piece by piece. Then, barely above a whisper, "Do you hate me?" The question caught me off guard. "What?" He inched closer, and I could smell his cologne, something clean and subtle that made my head spin. "You act like I drive you crazy," he said, his eyes searching my face. "Like you can't stand me, but you never actually push me away." My mouth went dry. "That's because you don't give me a choice." Something shifted in his expression then, the playful mask falling away to reveal something raw and real. "You always have a choice, Park." Time seemed to stop. The library faded to background noise, distant page turns, whispered conversations, the hum of fluorescent lights. All I could focus on was Leo, sitting too close, looking at me like, my heart thundered in my chest. For one electric moment, I thought he might kiss me. I wasn't sure if I wanted him to or not. But then he let out a slow breath and pulled back, taking all the oxygen in the room with him. "Forget it," he murmured, standing up. "Leo," his name slipped out before I could stop it. He gave me a smile I'd never seen before, soft, almost sad, knowing. "See you tomorrow, genius." I sat there long after he left, my skin burning with phantom touches, my mind replaying every moment. The library had never felt so empty. For 3 days, I tried to erase Leo Navarro from my life. It was like trying to ignore gravity. He was everywhere, lounging in hallways I needed to walk through, appearing outside my classrooms between periods, claiming space at nearby lunch tables. But I kept my eyes down, built walls of textbooks and silence between us, refused to acknowledge the weight of his stares that seemed to follow me everywhere. Because that moment in the library, it couldn't mean anything. If I let myself believe it did, I'd have to face the truth about how my heart had raced, how desperately I'd wanted him to close that gap between us, and that thought terrified me more than any test ever could. By day 4, Leo snapped. I was heading for the parking lot after last period when a strong hand seized my wrist, yanking me sideways into an empty classroom. The door clicked shut with a finality that made my stomach drop. "What the hell is your—" The words died in my throat as I turned to face Leo. He stood between me and the door, arms crossed, radiating fury and something else I couldn't name. "What's your problem, Park?" His voice was dangerously quiet. I jerked my arm free, trying to ignore how my skin tingled where he'd touched me. "Excuse me? You've been avoiding me." He stepped closer, and I could see the muscle working in his jaw. "I've been busy," I said, aiming for casual and missing by miles. "Bullshit." I backed up. "Got it." Leo's voice came out hollow, nothing like his usual confident tone. He turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing in the empty classroom. Jesse stood frozen, his fists clenched so tight his nails bit into his palms, his stomach churning with guilt. The lie hung between them like poison in the air. They both knew it, could taste its bitterness. The thing that blindsided Jesse most was how much it hurt. Leo had always been the thorn in his side. Too loud, too cocky, too present. He was supposed to be just an irritation, like a pebble in Jesse's shoe that he could eventually shake out and forget. So why did Jesse feel like he'd just torn something vital inside himself? The next few days felt wrong, like a photo negative of their normal routine. The spots where Leo used to be became glaring empty spaces. No waiting after class, no early arrivals to tutoring, no accidentally bumping into each other in the hallways. Leo's eyes would slide past Jesse like he was made of glass. Jesse kept telling himself this was exactly what he'd asked for. Then why did every breath feel like drowning? Despite his best efforts, Jesse's eyes betrayed him daily. They searched for Leo automatically, like a compass needle seeking north. In the crowded hallways, across the noisy cafeteria, during their painfully quiet tutoring sessions, Leo's absence screamed louder than his presence ever had. Sure, Leo's physical form still occupied space in these places, but the real Leo, the one with the infuriating smirk and terrible jokes, had vanished. The boy who now sat in Leo's chair was a stranger wearing familiar skin, going through motions without any of the warmth that had made him Leo. The change was everywhere, in all the little things Jesse had never realized he'd come to expect. No more lingering touches during tutoring sessions. No more waiting by Jesse's locker after class, leaning against it with that insufferable grin. No more intense gazes that made Jesse feel like he was the only person in a crowded room. Each absence felt like a paper cut, small but stinging, accumulating until Jesse could barely breathe through the pain. It was ridiculous, really. He'd spent months building walls between them, and now that Leo had finally stopped trying to climb them, Jesse felt like he was the one trapped inside. What made it infinitely worse was how perfectly fine Leo seemed. Jesse would catch glimpses of him in the gym, his laughter echoing off the walls as he joked with his teammates. He'd see Leo in the courtyard, casually draping his arm around some girl's shoulders, his smile easy and genuine in a way it hadn't been during their last few encounters. He acted like nothing had changed, like their whole complicated mess had meant nothing to him. Each time Jesse witnessed these moments, something dark and ugly twisted in his stomach. He told himself he had no right to feel this way. After all, wasn't this what he'd wanted? The realization hit Jesse with the force of a freight train one ordinary Tuesday afternoon. He was sitting in the library, staring at the same paragraph he'd been trying to read for 20 minutes, when it finally clicked. All this time, he'd been lying, not just to Leo, but to himself. He'd wrapped himself in layers of denial, convincing himself that whatever had sparked between them was temporary, meaningless, easily forgotten. But now, surrounded by the books that couldn't distract him and the silence that wouldn't comfort him, Jesse faced the truth. He missed Leo. Not just missed him, he wanted him. Wanted his stupid jokes and his cocky confidence, the way he could break through Jesse's carefully constructed defenses with nothing but a smile. He wanted the way Leo used to look at him, like Jesse was a puzzle worth solving, a prize worth waiting for. But Leo wasn't waiting anymore. He'd finally done what Jesse had been telling him to do all along. He'd moved on. And for the first time in his life, Jesse knew exactly what he needed to do, even if it terrified him. He had to fix this. That's how he found himself walking into the gym after practice hours, his heart pounding against his ribs. The massive space was almost empty, the usual chaos of practice replaced by an eerie quiet. The lingering smell of rubber and sweat hung in the air, and somewhere in this cavernous space was Leo, and hopefully, Jesse's chance to make things right. The empty gym echoed with the steady thump, thump, thump of a basketball hitting hardwood. Leo stood at the far end of the court, methodically shooting baskets with a blank expression that made Jesse's stomach twist. Each step forward felt like walking through quicksand, his shoes squeaking softly against the polished floor. After days of rehearsing this moment in his head, Jesse found himself here, frozen just a few feet away from Leo, with all his carefully planned words stuck in his throat. Leo didn't even glance his way. "What do you want, Park?" His voice bounced off the high ceiling, hollow and distant. Jesse took a deep breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I lost the bet, right?" The basketball bounced once, twice, then rolled away into silence. Leo turned slowly, his forehead creased in confusion. "What?" "You won," Jesse managed, forcing himself to meet Leo's eyes. "And I never really paid up." He exhaled shakily. "So, I owe you." Leo let out a harsh laugh, retrieving the ball and spinning it between his hands like a nervous habit. "Don't need your pity, genius." "It's not pity." Jesse stepped closer, surprised by how steady his voice sounded when his pulse was racing like a runaway train. "I'm serious." Leo studied him for what felt like forever, something shifting in his expression, a crack in the wall he'd built between them. "Yeah?" His voice dropped. Jesse's mouth went dry as dust. He took another step forward, eliminating more of the space between them. The gym's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting shadows across Leo's face. One kiss. Leo's sharp intake of breath echoed in the quiet gym. For the first time since their fight, Jesse had his complete attention. No jokes, no defensive smirks, just pure, unguarded surprise in his dark eyes. "Are you serious?" The words came out barely above a whisper, like he was afraid speaking too loudly might break whatever spell this was. Jesse nodded, his heart in his throat. "I'm tired of pretending I don't want you." He stood his ground, refusing to back away or break eye contact, letting Leo see the truth written all over his face. The basketball hit the floor with a dull thud and rolled away, forgotten. In 2 quick steps, Leo closed the remaining distance between them, and suddenly his lips were on Jesse's. There was nothing tentative about it. This kiss held all the pent-up frustration, longing, and desire they'd both been fighting. It was everything Jesse had been avoiding, everything he'd been running from, crashing over him like a wave. Leo's hands gripped Jesse's collar, pulling him closer, deepening the kiss, like he was afraid this might be his only chance. Heat flooded Jesse's chest as his fingers twisted in Leo's jersey, holding on for dear life. The world around them faded to background noise, the humming lights, the distant sounds of traffic outside. All of it disappeared. All Jesse could hear was his own thundering heartbeat and Leo's ragged breathing, the small, desperate sound he made as he pressed closer, like he was terrified Jesse might vanish if he let go. But Jesse wasn't going anywhere. Not this time. Not ever again. When they finally broke apart, Leo rested his forehead against Jesse's, their breaths mingling in the small space between them. Their chests rose and fell in perfect sync, like their hearts had finally found the same rhythm. "Took you long enough," Leo murmured, his voice deliciously rough. That familiar hint of a grin played on his lips, but there was something different about it now. Softer, more genuine. "Shut up," Jesse breathed, but there was no bite to it. Leo just laughed, the sound warm and real, before pulling him in for another kiss. Jesse had walked in here thinking this would be simple. One kiss to settle a bet, to prove something to Leo and maybe to himself. But standing here now, with Leo's fingers twisted in his shirt and warm breath ghosting across his skin, he realized how naive that thought had been. This wasn't settling anything. It was surrendering to something that had been inevitable all along. Leo kissed exactly the way he played basketball. All in, passionate, holding nothing back. There was no trace of doubt or hesitation, just pure intensity that made Jesse's knees weak. Everything they'd been dancing around for weeks, every charged moment and lingering look, had led them here. Jesse's fingers tightened in Leo's jersey, his heart pounding so hard he was sure Leo must feel it. His thoughts scattered like leaves in the wind, but for once in his life, Jesse didn't need to think. This was real. This was right. When Leo pulled back slightly, his dark eyes roamed Jesse's face like he was trying to memorize every detail. The fluorescent gym lights cast shadows across his features, making him look almost vulnerable. They stood there in silence, the moment stretching between them like spun glass, too delicate to disturb, too precious to rush. Then Leo reached up, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle as they traced the side of Jesse's face. Jesse found himself leaning into the touch without thinking, and the smile that spread across Leo's face wasn't his usual cocky grin. It was something new, something raw and honest that made Jesse's stomach do backflips. The realization hit him like a thunderbolt. He'd spent so much time running from this, building walls and making excuses, trying to push Leo away. But standing here in the empty gym, with Leo's hand warm against his skin, Jesse finally admitted to himself that he didn't want to run anymore. He wanted this. He wanted Leo, with all his annoying confidence and terrible jokes and the way he could see right through Jesse's defenses. Leo's thumb traced along Jesse's jawline, his touch almost reverent. "Are you going to disappear on me again?" There was a hint of real fear beneath the casual question. Jesse exhaled slowly, shaking his head. No. One simple word, but it felt like a promise. Something flickered across Leo's face. Jesse rolled his eyes, but couldn't stop the smile tugging at his lips. He knew they had more to talk about, more to figure out, but right now, this was enough. Leo's grin widened. "You like me?" "You're insufferable," Jesse groaned, but there was no heat behind it. Leo's fingers tightened possessively in Jesse's shirt. "Yeah," he agreed, eyes sparkling with mischief and something deeper. "But you still like me." And standing there in the empty gym, with the echo of bouncing basketballs still hanging in the air and Leo's warmth seeping into his skin, Jesse couldn't deny it anymore. He did like Leo. Maybe he always had. Jesse sighed, but didn't argue. There was no point denying it anymore. Leo's smirk melted into something gentler as his fingers briefly tangled with Jesse's before he pulled away, stretching his arms above his head with casual grace. "Guess this means I won, huh?" "Won what?" Jesse asked, raising an eyebrow. Leo shrugged, looking entirely too pleased with himself. "The bet." "You wanted a kiss?" Jesse scoffed, trying to sound unimpressed. "Nah," Leo's eyes sparkled. "I wanted you." Jesse's breath caught in his throat, his heart doing that stupid flip thing it seemed to do around Leo these days. Leo just grinned and backed toward the gym doors, his voice light and teasing. "See you tomorrow, genius." Jesse stood frozen in the empty gym long after Leo had gone, his heart still racing, lips tingling from the kiss. His carefully ordered world had just spun completely off its axis. For the first time in his life, Jesse Park had no idea what came next, and surprisingly, he was okay with that. That night, Jesse barely slept. He kept replaying the kiss in his head like a favorite movie scene, analyzing every moment, every touch, every word. By morning, he'd almost convinced himself it was just one of those things, a moment of madness that they'd both silently agree to forget. But when he walked into school the next day, there was Leo, waiting by his locker like he'd always belonged there. Jesse's brain barely had time to process the sight before Leo was moving into his space, that familiar grin lighting up his face. Everything had changed, but somehow nothing had. "Morning, genius," Leo drawled, way too cheerful for this early hour. Jesse scowled, his heart already picking up speed. "What are you doing?" "Walking you to class," Leo said, blinking with fake innocence. "You don't even take chemistry." Leo casually threw an arm around Jesse's shoulders, completely ignoring the way Jesse tensed up like a startled cat. "Guess I do now." Jesse's face burned as he shoved Leo's arm off. "You're impossible." And yet, Leo's smirk was unbearable. "You still like me." Jesse groaned and pushed past him, but he didn't deny it. That was how it all started. Instead of backing off, Leo seemed to take Jesse's silence as permission to be even more present. He started claiming the seat next to Jesse in the cafeteria, finding any excuse to touch him, fingers brushing when they walked together, knees bumping under study tables, tugging on Jesse's sleeve whenever he caught him zoning out in class. And Jesse? He let it happen. It was weird at first, having someone constantly there, someone deliberately choosing to be part of his perfectly organized life. Jesse wasn't used to being chosen. Not like this. Not over and over again. But Leo kept showing up, kept choosing him, like it was the easiest thing in the world. One quiet afternoon, Jesse was sitting on a bench outside the library, buried in his notes, when Leo dropped down beside him. Before Jesse could react, Leo snatched the pen right out of his hand. "Give it back," Jesse glared, trying to ignore how natural it felt to have Leo beside him now. Leo twirled the pen between his fingers with practiced ease, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "What's the magic word?" "I hate you," Jesse muttered, not meaning a single word. Leo chuckled, casually tossing the pen onto Jesse's notebook. Then, before Jesse could process what was happening, Leo leaned in and kissed him. It was quick, gentle, just the softest brush of lips, but it still sent Jesse's heart crashing against his ribcage like a wild thing trying to escape. When Leo pulled back, his face held that insufferably satisfied expression that used to drive Jesse crazy, and still did, but for entirely different reasons now. "That's the real magic word, Park." Jesse sat there, completely speechless, warmth spreading from his chest to the tips of his ears. His brain seemed to have short-circuited, which only made Leo's grin grow wider. "You're blushing," Leo pointed out, looking delighted. "You're an idiot," Jesse shoved him, but there was no force behind it. Leo just laughed, warm and real, bumping their shoulders together. "And yet," he trailed off, raising an eyebrow expectantly. Jesse sighed, but couldn't fight the smile spreading across his face. Leo didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew how it ended. The same way everything between them seemed to end these days, with Jesse admitting, at least to himself, that somehow, against all logic and probability, he had fallen for this impossible, insufferable boy. And sitting there in the afternoon sun, with Leo's warmth pressed against his side and their homework forgotten between them, Jesse realized he wouldn't have it any other way.